Tom Barlow's mornings were sacred. Every sunrise began the same way for the past 15 years, with a slow creak of the screen door, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hand, and the gentle hiss of sprinklers echoing down Maple Glen Court. It wasn't anything fancy, just a man, his porch, and a neighborhood that smelled like fresh-cut grass and mild ambition. You could almost set your watch to the rhythm of it all. Mrs. Dorsey walked her poodle exactly at 7. Carl across the street turned on his leaf blower like it was a competitive sport, and Tom, retired Navy engineer, widower, homeowner, and general peacekeeper, took his seat in the same faded wooden chair by his porch rail, ready for his daily crossword and first sip of tranquility. He never thought much of it. He'd earned this quiet. After 20 years of ship engines and radio chatter, silence was a luxury. His porch was more than a space. It was a little ceremony of peace. He'd nod to the mailman, wave to the teenagers catching the bus, and occasionally tip his mug to the sunrise like a toast to another day of freedom from alarms and deadlines. Tom wasn't one to ruffle feathers. He believed in mowing your lawn, paying your dues, and minding your business. 3 principles he thought most neighbors shared. That assumption lasted until the day Karen Witherspoon moved in. Karen was the kind of person who believed authority could be self-assigned if you spoke loudly enough while holding a clipboard. She arrived in Maple Glen Estates with the enthusiasm of a substitute teacher who enjoyed pop quizzes. Within a month, there were new flyers on the community board. Reminder: trash cans must be retrieved within 30 minutes of collection. Then came emails about mailbox uniformity and approved flag dimensions. She spoke at HOA meetings like she was auditioning for local office. Every rule had a PowerPoint, every sentence a passive-aggressive flourish. Tom found her exhausting but harmless. Every neighborhood had a Karen, he figured, some engine that ran on indignation and decaf tea. He nodded politely at her during meetings, offered polite mornings, and went right back to his coffee. Still, he could sense her eyes now and then, scanning the street like a radar for noncompliance. Once, she left a note on Carl's door because his Christmas lights lingered past Epiphany. Another time, she sent a full email chain about someone's wind chimes being audibly intrusive. Maple Glen was a peaceful suburb, but under Karen's reign, it started to sound like a middle school detention room run by a bureaucrat. Tom stayed out of it until she turned her attention toward him. It was a Thursday in early spring, one of those perfect Georgia mornings when the air's cool enough for long sleeves but warm enough for bare feet on the porch. Tom was halfway through his crossword when he noticed a shadow cross his driveway. Karen, clipboard in hand, tracksuit zipped, expression tight enough to crack glass. "Morning," Tom called, trying to be neighborly. She hesitated, then smiled the way people smile right before telling you your car warranty's expired. "Good morning, Tom. Lovely day." "Can't complain," he said. "Coffee's hot, paper's dry, and the Braves might actually win this year." "Yes," she replied, though it sounded less like agreement and more like a preamble to bad news. "I did want to remind everyone about the importance of maintaining community presentation. Consistency is what keeps property values strong." Tom blinked. "You mean like mowing and trimming?" "Among other things." She glanced meaningfully at his mug. "Some residents have expressed concern about certain porch activities." "Porch activities?" he repeated, trying not to laugh. "You mean drinking coffee?" She pursed her lips. "Well, technically, front-facing consumption of beverages could fall under the category of non-decorous public display if it creates a casual atmosphere inconsistent with the neighborhood's aesthetic." Tom almost choked on his sip. "Aesthetic. Visual harmony, yes," she said. "Porches are meant to be architectural features, not social spaces." Tom leaned back in his chair, studying her. "So the problem is, I look too relaxed." Karen smiled like she'd just won a debate. "Exactly. You understand." "Sure," he said, his voice dry as the Georgia heat. "Wouldn't want to cause an outbreak of tranquility." She didn't laugh. Karen never laughed when someone else made the joke. She gave a curt nod and marched off, sneakers squeaking like punctuation marks on the pavement. Tom shook his head and went back to his crossword. It was absurd, But he'd learned not to underestimate people who mistake control for contribution. He figured that was the end of it. The next morning, he found something in his mailbox that wasn't the paper or a bill. It was an official HOA envelope, crisp and serious, sealed with that overly confident Maple Glen emblem that always reminded him of a bad tattoo. Inside was a letter. Dear Mr. Barlow, it has come to the attention of the board that you have been observed engaging in an activity deemed inconsistent with Section 4, Subrule 7C, Community Decorum and Presentation. Specifically, the repeated consumption of beverages in a front-facing porch area visible from the street. This constitutes a violation of our standards regarding neighborhood appearance and uniform conduct. Fine $50. Violation: inappropriate yard conduct. Please remit payment within 10 business days to avoid further penalties. Tom read it twice, then a third time because surely there was a punchline hidden somewhere in the bureaucratic nonsense. But no. Stapled behind it was a grainy photo clearly taken from across the street. There he was, in his chair, mid-sip, a red circle drawn around him like a criminal caught in the act of enjoying life. He laughed out loud, a real belly laugh that startled the morning doves off the power line. They find me for drinking coffee? He sat down and stared at the letter again, half expecting it to evaporate out of sheer ridiculousness. But there it was, signed by Karen Witherspoon, HOA president. Tom wasn't a man prone to anger. Life had already taught him the futility of yelling at walls. But this was a new kind of stupid. He looked around at his lawn. Neatly trimmed, edges clean, American flag folded just right. There wasn't a thing wrong with it, except, apparently, the sight of him existing peacefully. That night, he told his neighbor Carl about it. Carl almost dropped his beer laughing. Buddy, I've heard of lawn fines, fence fines, trash fines, but a coffee fine? That's new. Tom grinned. Guess I'm pioneering the caffeine rebellion. Gonna pay it? Not yet, Tom said. I want to see how deep this rabbit hole goes. He pinned the letter on his fridge like a trophy. Every time he opened the door for milk, it stared back at him, official letterhead and all, reminding him that somewhere out there, a grown adult had written inappropriate yard conduct with a straight face. And that was the moment the porch didn't just feel like a place to drink coffee anymore. Felt like a line in the sand. The next morning, Tom stepped outside with a new grin and an even bigger mug. This one a gift from his daughter that read, "Decaf is for diplomats." He sat down, leaned back, and took a deliberate sip. The sprinklers hissed. The birds sang. And across the street, a curtain twitched. He didn't have to see her face to know it was Karen. She'd fired the first shot in what would soon become Maple Glen's strangest suburban war, the battle over one man's morning coffee. And as Tom folded his newspaper and looked at that absurd letter again, one thought crossed his mind, dry as dust but twice as sharp. That letter, he muttered, raising his mug toward the twitching curtain, changed everything. The following morning, Tom made sure to wake up early enough to watch the sun stretch across his lawn like it had every other day, just to prove a point. He brewed his coffee a little stronger, the kind that could dissolve self-righteousness if poured directly on it, and carried it out front. The mug this time was bold red and oversized, with the words "World's Okayest Neighbor" printed across it in block letters. He sat down right where he always did, legs crossed, newspaper folded open, and the faintest smile tugging at his lips. He hadn't even taken his second sip before he heard the unmistakable squeak of rubber soles on pavement. Karen's morning jogs were less about fitness and more about surveillance, a patrol disguised as cardio. She slowed near his driveway, adjusting her sunglasses like a sheriff about to deliver justice. "Morning," Tom said cheerfully. "Morning," she replied, breath short but tone crisp. "I assume you received your notice?" "Oh, I did," he said, holding up his mug as if it were Exhibit A. "Very official. Almost made me want to frame it." Karen squinted. "You do understand the seriousness of non-compliance?" "Sure do. The community could crumble at any moment. Next thing you know, someone might be seen reading a magazine outdoors." "That's not funny, Tom," she said, though the corners of her mouth twitched like she was fighting not to smirk. The rule exists to preserve neighborhood harmony. He nodded gravely. And nothing says harmony like banning coffee. Karen huffed. It's not the beverage, it's the optics. When residents see casual behavior on front-facing property, it gives a relaxed impression. He sipped deliberately. You don't say. You're mocking me. Not you personally, Tom said, setting down his mug. Just the idea that caffeine is a threat to community morale. That ended the conversation. Karen turned sharply, muttering something about further action, and resumed her jog, sneakers squeaking like punctuation marks of outrage. Tom chuckled to himself. But his amusement didn't last long. 2 days later, he came home from running errands to find another envelope in the mailbox. Same header, same seal. He opened it on the porch, half expecting it to explode confetti labeled, "You're being punked. No such luck. Second notice of violation." It read, "Continued consumption of beverages in a front-facing area after prior citation. Fines may double for repeated disregard." At the bottom, in bold, "Failure to comply may result in board review." He laughed again, this time quieter, shaking his head. "They really doubled down," he muttered. He added the new letter to the first one on his refrigerator, framing them side by side like a growing art exhibit. Above them, he taped a sticky note that read, "Collection of Absurdities, by T. Barlow." That weekend, he mowed his lawn, edged the driveway, and waved at passing cars like nothing was wrong. But the Whisper network was alive. By Saturday afternoon, neighbors were stopping by, each carrying their own version of disbelief. "You got fined for coffee?" asked Carl, leaning on his rake. "Man, I got written up once for leaving my trash bin out an extra hour. But coffee? That's new." Mrs. Dorsey from down the street came by with her dog and said, "Sweetheart, I thought they were joking, but Karen brought it up at the meeting. She showed a photo like you'd vandalized the community pool." Tom laughed. "If that's vandalism, I'm the most polite criminal alive. Maybe you should just drink inside," she suggested gently. "You know, keep the peace." Tom smiled. "If peace means hiding from sunlight, we've lost more than we think." By Monday, the story had spread. People started joking about Porchgate. Someone even slipped an anonymous note under his door that said, "Stand strong. Brew freely." But Karen wasn't laughing. That week's HOA newsletter contained a new section titled Clarifications on Community Decorum. It read like a parody of itself. Residents are reminded that porches, lawns, and front-facing areas should project a sense of uniform dignity. Activities involving consumption of food or drink in these areas may diminish the neighborhood's collective image. Tom printed it out, highlighted the word may, and pinned it next to the fines on his fridge. The following morning, he decided if they wanted a spectacle, he'd give them one. Politely. He brewed his coffee and set up not one, but 2 folding chairs on his porch. When Carl walked by, Tom waved. "Care to join me in my life of crime?" Carl grinned, jogged across the street, and sat down. "I like my coffee black and my rebellion civil." They sat there for 20 minutes, chatting about football while Karen drove by twice, slowing down both times. The second time, she actually stopped. "I see we're still disregarding regulations," she called from her car window. Tom tilted his head. "Didn't realize coffee had a speed limit." "You're being deliberately defiant." "Not at all," he said. "I'm being deliberately awake." "Fine," she snapped. "If that's how you want it, we'll handle it formally." And with that, she rolled up her window and drove off, probably to file a report in triplicate. The next day, the fine doubled, $100 now, and came with a note threatening board review and potential citation for noncompliance. Tom stared at the letter, impressed by the commitment to absurdity. "She really thinks she's Homeland Security," he muttered. That evening, he decided to attend the next HOA meeting. It was held in the community center, fluorescent lights, folding chairs, and a snack table that made every donut look like a peace offering. Tom arrived early, coffee mug in hand, because of course he did. The room buzzed with low conversation. People knew why he was there. When Karen entered, clutching her binder like a badge of office. The air shifted. She started the meeting with her usual scripted cheerfulness. "Welcome, neighbors. First on the agenda, community presentation concerns." Tom smiled. "Here we go." She clicked her PowerPoint remote, and there it was, the now famous photo of Tom on his porch, red circle around his mug like it was evidence in a high-profile case. "As you can see," she began, "this kind of public casualness undermines the neighborhood's image. We must ask ourselves, what message does this send to visitors or potential buyers?" Someone in the back whispered, "That we like coffee?" A few chuckles rippled through the room. Karen frowned. "This isn't about coffee. It's about decorum." Tom raised his hand. "Quick question. Is there a sub-rule about sitting outdoors without a beverage? Or is it only liquid-related offenses?" A few snorts of laughter broke through. Karen's cheeks colored. "You're being flippant, Mr. Barlow." "I'm being precise," he said, "because I read Section 4, Sub-Rule 7C. It doesn't mention coffee, or sitting, or being alive in public." The laughter grew louder. Karen's eyes narrowed. After the meeting adjourned, Carl clapped Tom on the shoulder. "You just became a legend." "Don't want to be a legend," Tom said. "Just want my coffee." When he got home later that evening, the porch light cast a calm yellow glow across the steps. But something looked off. He squinted. His chair, his faithful morning companion, was gone. Vanished. In its place was a small sticky note attached to the railing. "Public furniture cannot remain visible for more than 12 hours unattended. HOA management." Tom stared at it, speechless for a moment, then let out a low whistle. "She really escalated," he murmured. He folded the note neatly, took it inside, and placed it beside the fines on his refrigerator. The absurdity wall was growing like a museum of petty power. That night, he sat at his kitchen table, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound, and realized this wasn't just about coffee anymore. It was about principle, the absurd, overreaching principle that made ordinary people forget what community actually meant. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes before a plan starts to form. He wasn't going to yell. He wasn't going to rant. But he wasn't going to move inside either. As he poured himself one last cup before bed, he looked toward the empty porch and said softly, "All right, Karen, you want decorum? I'll give you decorum by the book." And with that, the quiet man who just wanted his morning coffee became the calmest rebel Maple Glen had ever seen. Tom started with the obvious weapon in any quiet rebellion. Paper. Not angry paper, tidy, tabbed, highlighted paper. He cleared his dining table like a man prepping for surgery and laid out the HOA charter, the last 3 years of meeting minutes he downloaded from the community website, and a legal pad so old it still had his small engine shop logo on it. He brewed a fresh pot, set his missing chair sticky note on the edge of the table like a mascot, and began to read. By page 4 he found the first hairline crack. Section 1.2. The board shall act as a body. Harmless words unless you enjoy precision. By page 12 he found something better. Any fine for decorum or presentation required a unanimous board vote, and a citation number recorded in the minutes. He flipped to the most recent minutes. Potluck signups, mulch discussion, a motion to cap holiday inflatables at 6 feet. Nowhere did the words coffee, porch, or decorum citation appear. He kept reading, pen tapping, the kind of patient rhythm that says I've got time. By dusk he had 3 neat stacks. Bylaws with yellow flags, requires unanimous vote. Minutes with pink flags, no vote recorded. And correspondence with blue flags, evidence of overreach. He wasn't building a courtroom case. He was building a neighborhood conversation that couldn't be shrugged off as Tom being difficult. You don't win these things by volume. You win by making people hear their own rules out loud. He wrote his first letter in his careful block print. Dear Board, I appreciate your attention to community standards. I have reviewed the bylaws and minutes and found no record of a board vote authorizing any decorum-related fines. Under Article 7C, a unanimous vote is required, as well as a citation number. Kindly provide the date of vote, the roll call, and the citation number for my records. If no such vote occurred, please confirm the fine is void and my chair will be returned or replaced. Respectfully, Thomas Barlow, Lot 14. He read it twice, underlined respectfully, and smiled. He printed 12 copies, one for each board member, one for the management company, and one for Karen, who would feel the weight of respect more than any Barb. He mailed them certified because if you're going to be polite, you might as well be receipted. The next morning, he replaced the stolen porch chair with a folding camp chair and an air of unbothered ceremony. When Carl wandered over, Tom slid a second mug across the rail. "War room all set?" Carl asked. "War room is a library," Tom said. "Libraries beat loudspeakers. What if she keeps writing you up? Then we'll teach the bylaws to read themselves." He let that sink in. People underestimate the power of a man who finds calm interesting. By day 3, responses began to drip in. The management company emailed something slippery. "We trust the board has complied with all procedures." That told Tom everything. They hadn't checked a thing. The vice president called, voice sheepish. "Tom, look, I don't recall a vote." Karen said it was already in policy. Tom asked for the policy. There was a pause, then a promise to circle back. He wrote that phrase on his pad and underlined it. Bureaucracy's favorite hiding place. Evenings turned into neighborhood office hours. Folks stopped by not for spectacle but for solidarity. Mrs. Dorsey arrived with lemon bars and a confession. "Karen told me my flamingos were aspirational clutter." Carl printed "coffee is a reasonable use" on his home printer and taped it to his mailbox. High schoolers walked by and asked if they could take a selfie with the porch outlaw. Tom laughed and held up his mug like a tiny trophy. He wasn't trying to become a symbol. Symbols have a way of finding you. But symbols without a plan are just yard art. Tom had a plan. First, he gathered witnesses, because petty power loves secrecy and hates community memory. He typed slips of paper titled "Neighbor Note" with 2 blanks. Date and what you saw. Saw Tom sitting with coffee on porch. Looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. Not a riot. Saw Karen take photo from the sidewalk. Saw chair disappear. No city tag, no notice. He didn't ask anyone to exaggerate. Truth was funny enough. Second, he documented what the board failed to do. He pulled the state's nonprofit statutes, a quick library trip and a polite chat with the librarian who said, "HOAs again," and flagged the parts about open meetings, notice requirements, and actions outside a meeting requiring unanimous written consent. He didn't need to threaten. He needed to show that the board had given him the ball by forgetting their own end zone. Third, he made the thing public but gentle. He printed an 8.5 by 11 flyer and slid it into a clear sleeve on his porch post. "Good morning, neighbors. For clarity, the HOA fined me for drinking coffee on my porch without a recorded vote. Our bylaws require a unanimous vote and a citation number. I'm asking the board to follow the bylaws. If you've been cited without a vote, feel free to drop a note." Beneath it, a little wooden box Carl built with index cards and pens. Within 2 days, the box was a confessional. Someone wrote, "They told me my wreath was too seasonal in February." Another, "Got warned for audible laughter after 9 p.m. I thought it was a joke." Tom sorted the cards by type. Fines, warnings, shaming. Not to weaponize but to pattern. Petty feels personal until you see it's procedural. On Friday, he wore a collared shirt, printed copies of everything, and walked to the management office. Not to grandstand, but to be seen. He asked the receptionist, cheerful and harried, for the file with his citation. She clicked, frowned, clicked again. "I don't see a citation number," she said. "But it's on the ledger." Tom nodded. Ledger without vote is a diary. He left her with a neat packet labeled "Missing Votes," "Request for Cure," and a small tin of butter cookies, because kindness wedges doors open that rhetoric can't. That afternoon, he set the next stage. The coffee club. Not a rally, not a protest. A ritual scaled up. He texted the few neighbors who had already been stopping by and said, "Saturday, 7 a.m. sit on your own porch with your own mug. Nothing to shout. Just sit." The brilliance of quiet is that it travels. Saturday morning, porches across Maple Glen produced a soft, synchronized murmur. Mugs lifted, newspapers rustled. Good mornings traded the way currency used to be. Karen jogged past at 6:58, then at 7:12, then at 7:25, each lap a little more pinched. Tom didn't wave the first time. He waved the second. By the third, the cul-de-sac practically gleamed with relaxed impressions. At 9 a.m., an email hit his inbox from the vice president again. "Can we talk?" Tom invited him over. They sat on the porch because of course they did, and Tom poured him coffee. The VP looked mortified. "She told us it was already policy," he said. "Said decorum covers it." Tom slid over the highlighted clause requiring a unanimous vote. The VP read it, sighed and said, "We didn't vote." He glanced at the box of neighbor notes. "Is all that?" Tom nodded. "Other people's normal." The VP rubbed his forehead. "We're going to need to fix this." "Good news," Tom said mildly. "Fixing is cheaper than doubling down." He sent one more letter that evening, short and clean. "If a vote did not occur, please confirm the fine is void, remove any ledger entries, and return or replace my chair. I will assume no vote occurred if I don't receive the minutes by Wednesday. In that case, I'll treat this as an administrative error we can cure without counsel." He wasn't bluffing, but he also wasn't racing to court. People who feel trapped dig in. People who see an exit look graceful taking it. While he waited, he tightened his plan. If the board tried to retroactively ratify the fine, he had the time-stamped letters and the calendar proving the fine predated any meeting notice. If they tried to pretend a vote existed, he had the minutes archived downloaded and printed, plus a neighbor who records every meeting because he's retired and enjoys microphones. If they tried to escalate, he had the state nonprofit rule on actions without a meeting, which requires unanimous written consent, and he already knew one member wouldn't sign. He printed a final set of handouts for the next meeting. One page, big font, plain English. What the bylaws actually say. No snark, no edge. A little footnote that read, "If we follow our rules, we won't need more rules." He tucked the stack into a manila folder and set it on the porch table, right where his chair used to be. An empty space makes a point. That night, his daughter called. He told her the gist. She laughed and said, "Only you would fight a war with office supplies." He said, "Ships are complicated. People are simpler. Give them a better map." He hung up and stepped outside. The cul-de-sac glowed with porch lights, low and warm. Somewhere, someone grilled onions. Somewhere else, a radio played oldies that forgot to feel old. He could hear the faint squeal of Karen's jogging stroller wheels in the distance even though she didn't have a stroller. That's how distinctive her footsteps had become in his head. Squeaks of principle. On Monday, a courier delivered a letter from the management office acknowledging, "A procedural review is underway." That was bureaucrat for, "You're right, but we need time to say it nicely." Tom poured another cup and sat down in the camp chair, which had begun to feel symbolic in its own right. Temporary, resilient, foldable like neighbor patience. He looked at the empty spot where his wooden chair had been and made a mental note to price a replacement. Maybe something with arms wide enough to hold a binder. He wasn't angry. He wasn't giddy. He was ready. He had turned the fine into a mirror and set it where everyone had to walk past. Once you see your own reflection holding a clipboard at dawn, you either put the clipboard down or start jogging at night. He checked his watch, folded his letter copies back into the folder, and took a long sip. Somewhere inside the management office, someone was drafting an apology, or a clarification, or a going forward. Somewhere inside Karen's head, the phrase unanimous vote had become a metronome. And somewhere inside this very street, a small idea was blooming. Maybe community standards should start with community. Tom looked at the road, calm as a man who had tested the hull and found it seaworthy. "They have no idea what's coming," he said, not as a threat, but as a promise that the next chapter would be written in their own handwriting. Then he set the folder on the rail, the way a chess player sets a queen just far enough out to be seen, and waited for the first move. The official announcement arrived like an invitation to absurdity. Special HOA meeting, emergency session regarding decorum enforcement and community presentation. The notice was taped to every mailbox in Maple Glen like a neighborhood Amber Alert, except the only thing missing was common sense. The meeting would take place in the community hall, same room where they'd hosted Christmas potlucks and yard sale planning sessions. Only this time the topic was one man's coffee habits. Tom read it over his morning cup and chuckled. Well, he muttered, they're finally going to put caffeine on trial. He wasn't angry. In fact, he felt oddly calm, that quiet, pre-storm calm that comes to people who've already decided what they stand for. He printed out his packet of bylaws, tabbed and labeled, and tucked it into a plain manila folder. He didn't need dramatics. The truth, when organized, was plenty theatrical on its own. Word spread quickly. By evening, the neighborhood was buzzing. Carl stopped by, practically gleeful. You going tomorrow? He asked. Wouldn't miss it, Tom replied. Karen's calling it the coffee incident. Tom smiled. Has a nice ring to it. Maybe I'll put it on a mug. The next morning, the hall was already packed. Folding chairs lined up in perfect rows, the snack table armed with coffee and stale donuts that suddenly felt like contraband. Neighbors whispered, eyes flicking between Karen at the front. Clipboard ready, expression taut, and Tom, who'd taken a middle seat, legs crossed, folder on his lap. Karen began promptly at 7. Good morning, everyone, she said, voice crisp, smile stretched tight. We've gathered to address a recent pattern of noncompliance that threatens the harmony and image of Maple Glen. Carl leaned over and whispered, She makes it sound like you spray-painted the clubhouse. Tom didn't reply. He was too busy watching Karen click her little remote to advance her PowerPoint. On the projector screen appeared a slide labeled Visual Standards Review. And there it was, the now infamous photo of him drinking coffee on his porch, red circle around his head like a wanted poster. Exhibit A, Karen said. Taken on March 14th at 7:03 a.m. Mr. Barlow, as you can see, is visibly lounging in a public-facing area while consuming a beverage. A few chuckles broke out in the back. Karen frowned. This is not a laughing matter. Section 4, Subrule 7C clearly states that residents must maintain visual harmony in public-facing spaces. Lounging, eating, or drinking outside of designated areas. Tom raised a hand, polite as ever. Karen, forgive me, but could you read that rule word for word? The one you just mentioned. She blinked. Well, I don't have the printed copy right here. That's fine, he said. He opened his folder and slid out a sheet, reading aloud, Section 4, Subrule 7C. Residents shall maintain cleanliness and aesthetic uniformity in all publicly visible areas of their property. He looked up. Doesn't mention drinking, or lounging, or, for that matter, human existence. A low murmur spread across the room. Karen's face tightened. The intent is clear. Intent doesn't supersede wording. Tom interrupted gently. You and I both know bylaws only say what they say, not what someone wishes they said. The vice president shifted in his chair. To clarify, was there a formal vote taken before this fine was issued? Karen glanced around. The board supported me informally. Tom raised an eyebrow. Informally. He flipped another page. Because the charter requires a unanimous recorded vote, and I checked the minutes, there wasn't one. I have them right here, dated the week before my fine. The room rippled with murmurs again. Mrs. Dorsey whispered to her friend, I told you she never holds real votes. Karen's tone sharpened. This meeting is not about technicalities, Mr. Barlow. It's about respect for standards. Tom smiled faintly. I agree completely. That's why I'm asking the board to respect its own standards. Laughter broke out, muffled at first, then openly as Carl failed to stifle a snort. Karen's composure began to unravel. This behavior, this mockery, undermines everything we stand for. What do we stand for? Someone called from the back. Coffee-free porches? The tension cracked. People started laughing. Real, belly laughter. And Karen's face went crimson. Enough, she barked. If we can't maintain order, this meeting is adjourned. But before she could storm off, The vice president spoke up. Actually, Karen, before we adjourn, I think we should clarify this issue. We've all seen the correspondence. We've all read the bylaw. It seems there might have been an overreach. Karen's eyes flashed. Overreach? Well, he continued awkwardly, if the fine wasn't approved by vote, it's technically invalid. The crowd murmured louder now. Someone clapped. Another voice shouted, "Give the man his chair back." Tom stood calmly, his tone even. "Folks, I don't want a circus. I just want the HOA to follow its own rules. If we do that, everyone wins, even Karen." It was the gentlest jab imaginable, but it landed like a knockout punch. Karen gathered her papers in furious silence, muttering about disciplinary escalation and procedural abuse. She stormed out, leaving the projector frozen on the words community decorum. The vice president looked embarrassed. "Well," he said into the microphone, "meeting adjourned, I guess." As the crowd filed out, neighbors patted Tom on the shoulder, some laughing, others whispering congratulations like he'd just won a courtroom drama. Carl grinned. "You, my friend, are the new George Washington of caffeine." Tom chuckled. "Just doing my civic duty." That night, a new letter appeared in his mailbox. Unsigned, but unmistakably written by Karen. The tone was icy, formal, and brimming with legalese. Further disciplinary action may be pursued for continued acts of defiance. The HOA reserves the right to escalate matters through civil channels. Tom read it once, smirked, and taped it to his mailbox next to his Veteran Lives Here sign. Beneath it, he added a sticky note that read, "Still within code." By morning, the whole neighborhood had seen it. People honked as they drove by. One neighbor left a Starbucks gift card in his mailbox with a note that said, "Keep fighting the good fight." The following week, Karen's empire began to crumble. The vice president, clearly tired of playing hall monitor, sent a formal letter to all residents. "Dear members, it has come to our attention that certain citations were issued without a recorded board vote, which constitutes a procedural error. Effective immediately, all fines issued without such authorization are null and void. We apologize for any confusion or inconvenience." At the bottom of the page, a signature, Karen's, small, cramped, and clearly coerced. Tom laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "Guess caffeine really is contagious," he said to himself. But Karen wasn't done. 2 days later, she called for yet another meeting, claiming it was to restore decorum. The turnout was even bigger this time. People arrived with travel mugs and thermoses, sipping openly like a caffeinated protest. The room buzzed with a barely restrained hilarity. Karen started to speak, but her microphone cut out. The vice president tapped it, then announced, "Before we begin, I'd like to thank Mr. Barlow for reminding us of the importance of following procedure." Applause broke out. Karen tried to continue, her face an alarming shade of pink. "This meeting is not about coffee," she cried over the clapping. "This is about maintaining order." But order was long gone. People were sipping, laughing, sharing donuts. Someone even handed Tom a commemorative mug that read, "Public Nuisance Number 1. He stood, calm as ever. "For the record," he said into the still crackling mic, "I accept the board's apology. And if anyone needs me, I'll be right where I've always been, on my porch, following the rules." The crowd erupted. Even the vice president laughed. Karen, realizing she was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, slammed her clipboard shut and declared the meeting adjourned for good. That night, the neighborhood felt lighter. People waved as they walked by, some carrying mugs in solidarity. The porch lights glowed like little beacons of victory. Tom sat down with his usual drink, the one that started it all. He looked out at the cul-de-sac. Peaceful, alive, absurdly normal again. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he saw Karen jogging, earbuds in, eyes straight ahead. She didn't look his way. He smiled and whispered to himself, "Justice brewed fresh daily." And as the sprinklers hissed and the streetlights flickered on, a new letter slid through his mail slot. This one from the board itself, stamped official. "Dear Mr. Barlow, we are pleased to inform you that your citation has been rescinded. Additionally, the HOA will be revising its bylaws to clarify acceptable front porch activities. We appreciate your patience and civility. He read it twice, smiled, and muttered, "Well, would you look at that? They finally found their decorum." Then he set the letter beside his growing wall of framed absurdities, poured another cup, and thought, this time with real amusement, that the best victories don't shout. They sip. The morning after the HOA's retreat felt different. The air had that clean, post-storm stillness, the kind that follows a thunderclap. Tom's mailbox was no longer a source of irritation but a monument, letters framed in absurd dignity now hung on his living room wall. The original $50 fine, the follow-up threat, and the official apology. Together, they told a story more ridiculous than any sitcom episode, yet undeniably satisfying. He poured himself a cup of coffee, stepped onto his porch, and took the first sip with a smirk that could only belong to a man who'd outwitted bureaucracy using nothing more than paper, patience, and caffeine. Across the street, Carl was already outside, wearing a grin big enough to see from 20 feet away. "Morning, Patriot," he called out. "The HOA hero of Maple Glen rides again." Tom chuckled. "Please, no statues. Just let me keep my porch." Carl raised his mug. "To constitutional caffeine rights." "Cheers to that," Tom said, clinking his mug in the air. By 9 o'clock, half the street had followed suit. Porches dotted with people holding steaming mugs, swapping stories, laughing softly. Even the mailman honked twice as he drove by. There was no organized rebellion, no picket signs or speeches, just the gentle, ordinary defiance of normal life returning. Later that week, an updated HOA newsletter landed in everyone's inbox. Normally, it would have gone straight to spam, but this one spread like wildfire. Right there on page 2, under the section titled Policy Revisions for Clarity, was a new rule. Reasonable porch activities, including but not limited to the consumption of coffee, tea, or other beverages, are considered compliant with community decorum standards. Below that, approved unanimously by the board. Tom nearly spit out his drink laughing. "Unanimously," he said aloud, savoring the word. "They finally learned how to vote." He printed that page out, laminated it, and pinned it beside the original fine on his wall. The irony was delicious, literally codified in writing. Karen had wanted control, but what she created was community. The neighborhood had rediscovered its sense of humor, and it was all because of one overreaching rule. At the next HOA meeting, the attendance was record-breaking. People came not out of fear or obligation, but curiosity. They wanted to see what would happen now that the dust had settled. Karen was there, of course, sitting stiffly at the front with a forced smile and a smaller binder. The vice president opened the meeting with a clear throat. "Before we begin," he said, "we'd like to recognize a positive outcome from recent discussions." He turned toward Tom. "Mr. Barlow, thank you for helping us clarify our rules and reminding us that fairness is part of harmony." There was a soft round of applause, polite but genuine. Tom nodded once. "Just glad to know coffee's legal again," he said, dry as toast. Laughter rippled through the room. Even Karen's smile twitched. Whether from pain or reluctant amusement, no one could tell. When the agenda turned to new business, Tom raised his hand. "I'd like to propose something small," he said. "Nothing formal, just a neighborhood tradition, a community coffee morning. Every Saturday, whoever wants can sit out front, share a drink, say hello. No meetings, no notes, no fines. Just folks being folks." The motion passed without debate. Carl stood up and shouted, "Call it the Maple Glen Peace Talks," and the name stuck instantly. That Saturday, the first peace talk took shape. Folding chairs lined the sidewalks. The air smelled of baked goods and roasted beans, and people wandered from yard to yard carrying thermoses and laughter. Someone brought a portable speaker playing old Motown songs, kids sold lemonade, and for the first time in years, Maple Glen felt like a neighborhood again, not a cluster of property lines. Tom sat quietly on his porch, watching it all unfold. He wasn't the center of attention. He didn't want to be. What pleased him most was how everyone seemed to relax. The tension that had once buzzed beneath the manicured lawns was gone, replaced by something real. Around 10, Karen appeared. She was in casual clothes, jeans, even holding a paper cup of coffee. When she approached, a few people turned to watch. Tom smiled warmly. "Morning, Karen." "Morning, Tom," she said, her tone measured. "I see the event has good turnout." "Seems folks like being neighbors again," he replied. She hesitated, then sighed. "For what it's worth, I may have overinterpreted certain clauses." Tom nodded slowly. "Happens to the best of us. Sometimes the rules look clearer when you're standing behind them." Her lips twitched into something almost resembling a smile. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "I'm enjoying my coffee," he said simply. She nodded, adjusted her sleeve, and walked on. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it didn't need to be. In suburbia, the smallest peace gestures carry the most meaning. That afternoon, Carl brought over a small cardboard box. "Got something for your Hall of Fame," he said. Inside was a brand-new wooden porch chair. Sturdy, varnished, perfect. On the backrest, a small brass plaque read, "Exhibit A, in memory of decorum." Tom laughed so hard he had to set his mug down. "Carl, you're insane." "Insanely supportive," Carl corrected. "Now the porch looks whole again." Tom installed the chair immediately, right in its rightful place. He sat down, leaned back, and let out a satisfied sigh. The view looked the same as it always had, same mailboxes, same driveways, same trees. But somehow, everything felt a little freer. Over the next few weeks, the story took on a life of its own. The coffee incident became legend, retold with slight exaggerations depending on who was speaking. Some said Karen tried to call the police. Others swore the state legislature got involved. None of it was true, of course, but truth mattered less than laughter. Even new residents heard about it before they moved in. It became part of Maple Glen's folklore. Tom's daughter, Emily, called after seeing a post about it in the local Facebook group. "Dad, are you seriously trending on Nextdoor?" she asked between giggles. "I guess so," he said. "Finally found my 15 minutes. They're calling you the Coffee Crusader. Better than HOA Fugitive," he said. He wasn't one for attention, but the small fame amused him. More importantly, it reminded people that rules, when unchecked, can make fools of everyone, even those who enforce them. Weeks later, the HOA board quietly amended a few other policies, softening lawn decor limits, removing the clause about uniform mailbox presentation. The newsletter now began with a message from your friendly HOA board instead of "reminder." Violations will not be tolerated. The tone of the neighborhood shifted permanently. One evening, while Tom sat outside watching the sky go amber, Carl strolled up with 2 beers instead of coffee. "You realize," Carl said, handing him one, "you didn't just win against the HOA, you fixed it." Tom took a long sip and smiled. "I didn't fix anything. I just reminded everyone that rules are supposed to make sense." Carl grinned. "Same thing, really." A breeze stirred the hydrangeas, and somewhere down the street, a screen door creaked open. Life went on, quietly improved. Before heading inside, Tom looked at his wall of framed absurdities one last time. He thought about taking them down, maybe reclaiming the space, but he didn't. They weren't trophies of defiance. They were reminders. Proof that dignity could outlast nonsense, and that humor was sharper than anger. Later that night, he brewed one last cup of decaf, a concession to his doctor, not the HOA, and carried it outside. The porch light glowed soft gold. The new chair creaked pleasantly beneath him, and the world was finally back to the right kind of boring. He took a slow sip, savoring the quiet, the satisfaction, the absurdity of it all. "Here's to decorum," he said softly to no one in particular. And somewhere in the distance, maybe on her early walk, Karen passed by his house. She didn't stop. She didn't glare. But as she turned the corner, she lifted one hand. A small, awkward wave. Tom raised his mug in return. "Still within code," he murmured, smiling into the steam. The neighborhood had found its balance again. Not through punishment, but through laughter, patience, and one man's refusal to let nonsense win. And as the sprinklers began their gentle rhythm across the lawns, Tom leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, and whispered, "Justice served hot." Tom always said a neighborhood is just a collection of small sounds that agree to live together. After the coffee war, Maple Glen's soundtrack softened back into itself. Sprinklers in the morning, garage doors in the evening, the hollow thunk of a newspaper landing on a driveway like a polite knock. You could track time by it again. Even the birds seemed to tune themselves to a more reasonable volume, as if the cul-de-sac had exhaled a very long breath and remembered how to be ordinary. He kept his wall of exhibits, but the frames didn't feel like trophies anymore. They felt like chapter markers. On weekday afternoons, if you stood in Tom's hallway and looked at them in order, the original fine, the follow-up, the apology, the newsletter revision, you could watch absurdity trip over its shoelaces and land in a chair. The brass plaque on his new porch chair made him smile every time he sat. Exhibit A, in memory of decorum. It was ridiculous, and it was perfect. Saturday mornings turned into ritual. The Maple Glen peace talks weren't formal. No sign-up sheets, no agendas, no minutes. Just neighbors sitting on their own porches, sometimes drifting to someone else's for a refill, sometimes waving from a distance because the coffee was hot and the robe was plaid. People shared banana bread and the kind of gossip that isn't cruel, just curious. Who's planting roses? Did you see the new yellow lab on Fairview? Is Carl really teaching himself the banjo? He was. The first week was rough. By the third, he could play something that almost sounded like a song, and the cul-de-sac applauded from their porches. Children reclaimed the sidewalks, scrawling chalk racetracks that wove around mailboxes like bright stitches. Teenagers, who normally moved in packs only when food was at stake, started walking dogs for free because it was nice out. One brought a sketchbook and sat on the curb sketching front porches like he was preserving a rare species. He gave Tom a drawing of his chair, the new one, with the mug balanced on the arm and the morning light cutting across the boards. Tom framed the sketch and hung it beside the letters. Paper fighting paper, then paper celebrating paper. Felt fitting. Karen adjusted, which surprised everyone, including Karen. Her jogs got earlier for a while, the retreat of a proud person who didn't know how to re-enter the room. But eventually she rejoined the street's rhythm. One Saturday, she showed up at a peace talk with a box of powdered donuts and the kind of smile that knows it's trying. There was a tiny tremor to it, a structural humility where a podium used to be. She set the box on Tom's porch rail. "These are permissible," she said, dry as a saltine. "According to revised subsection donut," Tom answered. A few neighbors watched the exchange like a wildlife documentary, predator and prey cautiously sharing a watering hole. Then two kids sprinted by, grabbed donuts with sugar-coated hands, and the tension dissolved into napkins and apologetic laughter. Karen didn't apologize with words. She did it by standing there, by not policing, by asking how Tom's daughter was, by staying long enough for a second donut and a conversation that wandered into normal territory. Yard fungus, knee pain, where to buy a decent kitchen faucet without taking out a loan. Suburbia's soft diplomacy. She even brought a new idea to the board, a seasonal porch parade, where people could decorate with flowers or flags or themes and neighbors could stroll in the evening, voting with clothespins for most whimsical, most relaxing, most "we swear we watered this." It passed unanimously. The board had learned to enjoy that word, and when the first parade happened, Tom walked behind a couple of retirees arguing mildly about begonias, which felt like a constitutional right. Unexpectedly, the biggest change wasn't policy. It was posture. People waved more, with their whole arm instead of the wrist flick that says, "Obligation fulfilled." Conversations at the mailbox lasted an extra minute. The email newsletters started with, "Thanks to everyone who," rather than "reminder that several of you." And the phrase "within code," once a joke and a shield, became a grin in the neighborhood's mouth. "How's the azalea? Within code. New grill. Oh yes, within code. Second donut? Bold choice. Still within code." Tom's daughter, Emily, visited on a Sunday. They did what they always do when she's home. Yard work they called serious horticulture despite being mostly trimming whatever had the audacity to grow. Around noon, They sat on the porch with sandwiches. She looked around and said, "It feels warmer here." "It's July," he said. "I mean people warmer. Softer around the edges." He nodded toward the street, where a retired couple debated mulch colors with the intensity of foreign ministers. "Takes one person to turn up the thermostat," he said. "Takes a few others to leave it there." She pointed at the framed letters inside. "You keeping those up forever?" "Probably," he said. "Not to stare at. To remember. When things get ridiculous again, and they will, it helps to have proof that ridiculousness can be walked back." That was the other truth Tom learned. The wheel doesn't stop turning just because you oil it once. 3 weeks after the bylaw update, an email popped up. Question regarding yard ornamentation. A new resident had installed a bright pink flamingo. An old resident insisted the bird lowered the tone. The board asked for input. Tom replied with 4 words. Reasonable porch activities apply. He didn't have to quote sections anymore. He just had to remind everyone of the spirit they'd already voted for. The flamingo stayed. Eventually it got a mate. Someone crocheted them little scarves in December, and Maple Glen survived. Of course, not every corner smoothed out. The leaf blower bandit still fired up at ungodly hours, and one guy on the corner believed his truck was invisible if he left the hazard lights on while parking across his lawn. But the complaints came framed with "Hey neighbor," and "No big deal if not," which in suburb language translates to, "I trust you to be human." Tom appreciated that more than perfect compliance. Perfection, he'd learned, is what people reach for when they don't have patience handy. Once, late in the summer, the board held a small workshop at the community center. What our rules are for. No projectors, no gotchas, just a round table with printed copies of the bylaws, a plate of cookies, and a flip chart where someone had written, safety, cleanliness, fairness, neighborliness. It wasn't revolutionary. It was obvious. But obvious works if you say it out loud. Karen sat beside the vice president and listened as a young mom talked about sidewalk chalk, as an older man asked for a bench near the mailbox, as Carl suggested a monthly tool share day so people could borrow a pressure washer and avoid buying one out of guilt and advertising. "We can write that into approved communal tools," Karen said, and nobody flinched at her process voice because now it was attached to the right impulse. Tom found himself speaking less and nodding more. He hadn't set out to be a voice of reason. He'd set out to drink coffee. But in a strange way, the coffee fight retuned his attention. He noticed how a neighborhood coaxes itself forward. Not by big speeches, but by quiet agreements repeated until they're habits. He started keeping a small notebook, not the legal pad, just a pocket thing, where he jotted lines he wanted to remember. Politeness is a form of engineering. Procedure is how you keep people from having to guess. If the rule needs a spotlight to make sense, turn on the hallway light instead. As summer bent toward fall, maple leaves stained the curb a dignified orange. The peace talks kept going, jackets now, steam visible above mugs. One evening after dinner, Tom circled the block at a pace his knees permitted and saw little scenes he hadn't seen in years. A neighbor teaching a kid to ride a bike using the ancient chant of pedal, pedal, pedal. A front yard book swap in an old birdhouse. A new family unloading a moving truck while 3 different people swooped in with casserole dishes like a tactical unit. Community is a muscle. Use it or it atrophies. Maple Glen was getting stronger. And because life loves symmetry, an envelope eventually appeared that made him laugh in the hallway. Not a fine. An invitation. "Dear Mr. Barlow, would you consider joining the Architectural Review Committee?" He laughed again. A full, startled sound, and set the letter under a magnet that said, "Don't make me use my Navy voice." He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He waited a week and wrote back, "I'll help for 1 year, provided we measure twice and cut once." The board said, "Deal." He added a private condition of his own. No clipboards on the first lap. If they needed clipboards, they would earn them. On his first day, he suggested a new rule that wasn't a rule at all. A preamble at the front of the bylaws, a single paragraph in plain language. Our documents are meant to help neighbors live well together. When in doubt, choose fairness over fuss, clarity over cleverness, and conversation over citation. It wasn't enforceable, and that was the point. It set the room's temperature before anyone reached for the thermostat. Months later, Tom stood on his porch under a December sky the color of old pewter and listened to Maple Glen's winter version of itself. Wind moving through bare branches, muffled football on a television somewhere, the drip of a thawing gutter. He took a sip, decaf this time because doctors can also win arguments, and looked at the framed letters one more time. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt prepared. Prepared for the next minor crusade someone would propose, the next moment a rule forgot who it worked for. Those moments would come. They always do. The trick isn't to fear them. It's to keep a folder, a pen, and a chair. A few days before Christmas, someone quietly set a small gift on his porch. A white ceramic mug, simple and heavy, with 3 words stamped in blue. Within, the code. He laughed hard enough that the mug fogged before it was filled. He washed it, poured coffee, and raised it toward the street just as Karen walked by, bundled in a scarf. She raised a mitten, the kind of wave that says, "We're all right." He returned it with the kind that says, "Yes, we are." If you asked Tom for advice after all this, and neighbors sometimes did, usually in a low voice with a, "You've got a minute?" he said a version of the same thing every time. You can't control the petty, but you can outlast it. Keep your seat. Use your words. Be courteous on purpose. Measure twice, cut once, and when they hand you nonsense, hand them a highlighter and let them hear themselves. People come around when they realize the rule follower knows the rules better than the ruler. And if the cycle starts again, if someone someday tries to outlaw pink flamingos or laughing too loudly after sunset, well, Maple Glen has more chairs now. More mugs. More practice. They know how to sit still, how to listen, how to nudge a meeting back toward sanity without spilling anything important. The neighborhood will be fine. Not perfect. Fine in the best way, lived in, looked after, within code. Tom leaned back, the chair creaking the way old would confess his comfort, and watched the street settle into evening. Porch lights blinked on one by one, like a string of patient constellations. Somewhere a kid tested a new harmonica. Somewhere else a dog barked at the idea of a squirrel. He lifted his mug in a small salute to the block, to the letters on the wall, to the ridiculous miracle of rules that can learn. "So if your HOA ever sends you a letter like mine," he said to the quiet, "remember the one thing they never expect. You sitting right where you are, steady as a fence post, smiling just enough to make them read the page out loud." He took another sip. The coffee was perfect. The evening was unremarkable. The best endings always are.